Okay, now you should be looking at this practice sheet. We're going to put all of these pieces together that we learned and do our first work with creating an equation that represents a line on a graph. So we're going to start with this top part, these sentences, fill in the blanks here, because this is a really step-by-step guide to the two pieces that you need in order to successfully write an equation. The first thing you're going to do, your step one, is that you are going to identify the slope, and you're going to do that on a graph. So if you need your foldable that talks about how to find slope on a graph, that might be helpful. And then you need to identify your y-intercept. You're going to write the equation when you're done in slope-intercept form, and slope-intercept form looks like this. It looks like y equals mx, sorry I don't have pink, I only have black, plus or minus, depending on if it's a positive or negative, your letter B, or your y-intercept. So now we've incorporated all four colors, and each of your equations needs to have those colors. The only exception is that if you end up with a 0 somewhere, which will happen eventually, we'll run into that at some point. So let's start with some examples. We'll do a few together. So in order to work with this particular graph, the first thing I need to do is make sure that I know what dots are on my graph. I've got one here that I just highlighted in gray and another one here. Now, if I look at my guide, both up above my step one and also down here, it tells me that what I've got to do first is I've got to find my m, or I've got to find my slope. So in order to find my slope, what we learned last time is that what we do is we move from one point to the next, right? And we count how many squares it takes us to make those movements. So if I begin and I start at this dot right here, and I'm trying to move up to the other, I'm going to have to move up 1, 2, 3 squares to get to my other dot. That would mean that my slope, change in y, my numerator number, is 3. Now I've also got to go back and I've got to find my change in x, because that becomes my denominator. So my change in x, let's see how much that is. If I move from here where I ended and over to the right, I only move over 1. Whoops, wrong pen. I only move over 1. So the slope of this particular line is 3 over 1. We also know from what we talked about yesterday that we are allowed to write the number or the slope 3 over 1 as just 3. Those things mean the same thing. For my equation, I think that's probably what I'll do. I'll end up writing my slope not as 3 over 1, but as regular old 3. So now I've got to go searching for my b. Now my b is that number that represents where the line touches the y-axis. So if I do a little digging and I take a peek, it looks like my line touches the y-axis right here. The coordinates of that point are over 0, down -3. So the number that I'm going to choose to put in the position of b in my equation is -3. So I'm going to write that b is equal to -3. My equation then, if I put all these pieces together and I get to color code just like I did up above, my equation looks like y, because that letter is always in the equation, equals 3 times x minus 3. And I'm going to choose to use a minus, right? Because that matches the fact that I have a negative y-intercept. If I had a positive y-intercept, I'd put plus 3. And that's how you build an equation that matches a line without having to look at all the individual dots on the line. Let's move over and we'll try one more. Now, so I'm going to go quickly this time. I'm going to identify my dots. I've got a dot here and I've got a dot here. Those are the ones I'm working with, okay? The first thing I need to do is identify my slope. There's my slope. And I'm going to start moving from one dot to the next. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to this particular point here. I start on the left, and I'm going to calculate how many times I have to move down to get to my other dot. It looks like I have to go down 1, 2, 3. So here's another one where I have to go 3, but this time I'm going down 3. So I might want to make my change in y equal to -3, because I'm showing that I'm moving down. I also notice when I look at my line that this is a line that should have a negative slope. Because it should have a negative slope, I know one of my numbers, either my change in y or my change in x, must be negative. So I think I'm going to do that and make my change in y negative since I moved down. Now I've got my change in x. And that, let's see, is 1, 2. In order to move from one dot to the other, I had to go over 2. So it looks like my slope for this particular line is -3/2. Now my b, or my y-intercept, is that point where the line crosses the y-axis. Looks like that's right here. The coordinates of that point are over 0 and up 2. So that means that my y-intercept, the number I'm going to use for b, is that point on the y where it crosses. So I'm going to write that my b is 2. And it's a positive 2, which will help me make sure that my equation says +2. Now I go to my template. Here we go quickly with our last example. There you are. Y equals -3/2x plus 2. Go ahead and finish the rest of your packet. You can either do it on paper or you can do it digitally on Notability.